Most of us were born into a society where all our standard physiological needs are provided for already by various utility industries. We live in a comparatively safe environment where we needn't be in constant fear of being attacked by nature or other men. We have a property market that, if we can afford it, allows us to purchase our own homes or welfare systems that provide accommodation for those who can't. We also have a legal system that dissuades the criminally intent to steal from or harm others. American psychologist Abraham Maslow believed that in freeing ourselves from these concerns enabled rich and giving relationships between people, where we form emotional bonds and cooperate with one another in a stable and productive manner, establishing societies in which we can compare ourselves to one another and size up whether or not our actions are socially acceptable. Now, we're fortunate enough to have some of the finest schools and universities in the world, and they give us the opportunity to become literate and critical in our approach to the spaces which we inhabit, gifting us with the ability to apply all that we've learned to pushing boundaries and pursuing our ultimate goals. However, there is a stark contrast here. For some of us, we're not born into a situation where all our physiological needs are catered for by utility industries, or catered for at all, for that matter. The idea of a rich giving relationship is muted by a more pressing need to survive. But I fear if I start with a discussion of issues of instability around the world, then I'd need to publish a book, and even then I would have barely uncovered the surface of the world's injustices. So instead I'll start here, in Greater London, where there isn't really an uncatered option to life, and being homeless is effectively illegal. Your water will come from a tap, your heating will come from gas lines or electric heaters, and your food will be imported to supermarkets. And as a result of increasing import tax and fuel prices, food bills are always going up. And if you want to live in a house, you have to pay for the privilege indefinitely in the form of council tax. You're probably thinking that this all seems pretty reasonable, except currently there are no legal alternatives for one helping themselves to these resources external to the utility industries that offer them, as all land, arable or otherwise, belongs to someone, and very few are educated in environmental and resource management, or have any appreciation and understanding of where the bare necessities of life actually come from. Jamie Oliver indicated this quite nicely when a class of 10-year-olds were shown a basket of veg, and the kids couldn't tell the difference between a potato and a carrot. So, if our nation of 63.2 million decided to take a more hands-on, natural approach to living, helping itself to the UK's resources, foraging and hunting, using locally sourced fuels for fire and cooking, it would be deemed socially unacceptable, illegal even, and potentially dangerous. Our current ignorance would destroy everything, species of plants and animals wiped out, mass deforestation, there'd be local resource wars, and chances are eventually we'd see a regression into a desperate and murderous society. And that's if we survived whatever illness, natural or man-made disaster the world threw at us without a superior understanding of medicines or modern sciences. Even though such problems could potentially be rectified with an alteration to the way we're taught, reverting back to hunter-gatherers isn't a particularly appealing or inspiring idea for those who want to continue pushing boundaries. After all, if it were not for the pioneering work of mankind and its continuing social evolution, we would not have progressed in medicine and science to the point where these potential difficulties have by and large been eradicated for the Western world. Our philosophies, if any, would have remained stunted. We wouldn't be able to freely communicate the issues that we face today with the depth and insight that we can now. So considering the impracticalities of going backwards in that sense, let's consider our present reality, because it'd be silly to live such a life when we don't need to or don't necessarily know how. And that reality is, we are still destroying everything, except modern global society has allowed us to charge and be charged for a quicker and more efficient mass destruction. Our inability to sustainably support ourselves is of ever greater importance, and something that I believe expressly links environmental decay across the world to more local social and cultural issues. Our glamour and status-driven lifestyles have closed the door to sustainability, whilst an undeterminable number of homeless people in the tens of thousands are subject to starvation, life-threatening weather conditions, substance abuse, and in some cases sexual abuse, all existing a stone throw away from the realms of overindulgence. Additionally, problems concerning the neediest among us who, for various cultural or social reasons, are unable to support themselves and know no other way to live, other than a prescribed means of living offered by the state. Equally concerning, many contributing members of society who work hard and still can't meet a living wage are helpless to credit and welfare systems that are regularly abused, and as a result of which have been compromised and are being made harder to apply for, in an attempt to discourage people from sponging off the state and going out to apply for jobs that aren't necessarily there, or as George Osborne says, are there, but nobody wants. And perhaps that has everything to do with the fact that these jobs are only part-time, or not covering the exorbitant travel expenses or higher rate council tax that's inevitably incurred by living or travelling in the city. Maybe those refusing these jobs believe that they have more potential, but can't afford a better education on account of excessive student fees. Either way, many are forced to live beyond their means, and plenty require benefits of some form or another to survive, because they simply do not possess the skill set or natural ability to support themselves. I'm not sure that our existing welfare system is necessarily the solution, for if you support someone their entire life and don't offer a solid method whereby they are taught to support themselves, they'll most likely become dependent. And if you suddenly take that away from them, most won't question whether or not they deserved it, they will just resent you for it. I believe the issue is primarily a cultural one. A revolution of the mind is required. We need to be influenced towards a more considered, self-sustained mode of living, where one can liberate themselves and others for free. It's partially happening, under the guise of community projects and charity worker support, but not always for the right reasons, and potentially not fast enough or on a scale that demands it. And what of how we're influenced, we creatures of comparison? Well, presently the mass media seem to promote celebrityism above all things. And it's not the type of celebrityism one might associate with a working class hero who represents a bulk of the population, but that which embodies a culture of self-entitlement, offering a something for nothing, buy now, pay later mentality of show and tellers that regale themselves with symbols of status while leading lives of excess consumption. And it's all reinforced by ads with emotionally penetrating intent that effectively apply psychological warfare techniques on the audience. These adverts that come at us from every angle, be it through the media that fills our peripheral, or printed on the front of our t-shirts and mugs, creates a language in which we're immersed. A language that if we do not speak will render us socially outcast from the norm. A language that we've become desensitized to, creating the belief that through your purchases you can enrich yourself. It quite literally manufactures an emotional compulsion to buy things that you do not need, and a sort of worship of objects, making us more interested in what we can make and or acquire than what's already in front of us. I fear that as we spend more and more time putting material goods in higher regard, we slowly forget what it is to be humans living in a delicate environment, a life in the balance, surrounded by other humans on a planet of finite resource. All the while, a web of news networks deliver their own versions of the truth, while bombarding us with paranoia and fear-mongering, and it's presented to us almost instantly across a myriad of social media sites 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's constant, and it's exhausting on the senses, creating a sort of widespread apathy and delusion, especially among the younger generations who haven't even left school yet, and on top of the existing pressure of trying to understand all that they're taught and where they fit in, are being told that they have to foot the bill for someone else's overspending while facing environmental and economical implosion. Is there any wonder, while we absorb and apply brand values to iconicize ourselves, when so very little is attributed to our own natural worth? Portrayed as ugly in so many ways, we actively encourage to change our form daily to appease one another by glorifying ourselves. It's a bit backwards. This show and tell society, as interconnected as it is also encouraging a sort of mental isolation, where greed and jealousy is allowed to thrive, to the point where we're putting the cart before the horse and suffering for it. It's the kind of greed that allows the banking system to gamble other people's money, with a win-win outcome that benefits the bankers more than anyone else. Perhaps more of the profits should be filtered into the interests of the people instead of the pockets of the bankers. Here comes a bit of global injustice and the hypocrisy that surrounds our quality of life. As you may or may not be aware, the UK isn't exactly the most resource-rich of countries, so we require a great deal of import to obtain the things which we want and most of what we need. Our own country depends on imported gas and petrol to operate as it does, effectively making us beholden to the rest of the world and the rates that they set in that respect. On top of this, because our own manufacturing and farming industries have far more stringent health and safety laws and impose higher taxes, our industries and government will support outsourcing its products from countries that employ abominable human, animal and environmental laws, as it secures cheaper supply lines that yield higher profit margins. And we'll all go along with it because we enjoy the benefits of living in Cornucopia, and many of us simply can't afford local alternatives. And those of us that can are desensitised and apathetic towards awareness campaigns because of the unforgiving pace of life that they're expected to live to keep up with the Joneses. Ironically, this reduces the amount of farming and manufacturing industries allowed to exist in the UK, and I don't understand what good employing stricter health and safety human rights laws is doing here when we're paying countries that condone far worse than what we could possibly imagine. Countries purged or plunged into a state of instability for the sake of profiteering out of resource, or the implementation of Western idealism. You can take advantage out of people's despair and confusion, and it's sickening to think that such opportunism can be profitable. I mean, sure, for those of us who are aware of the atrocities that are committed in the name of consumerism, we could band together, stop impulse buying, and start making more ethically considered purchases. There are loads of organisations that make it their priority to inform and guide people into making more ethically conscious purchases, and people do. But the cost of doing so isn't cheap, And I jump back to what I said about people in the UK not meeting a living wage, and the media-induced apathy that leaves us feeling out of our depth or unequipped to face any of these problems. There's a catch-22 here. If we want our expenditure to go down, while not relying on unethical or environmentally unfriendly businesses, then it first needs to go up, for applying the infrastructure of a more sustainable quality of life will be expensive. But take solace in the fact that there are alternatives. It's just these are changes that need to take place on a higher level. Solutions that require great sums of cash that might never make a return in a monetary sense, but will work towards establishing a better future for everyone. A rejiggling of our nation's priorities. Changes need to be made in government and through the banking industries that grease their wheels. A change in the way that we assess value and worth so that it transcends pounds and pennies. First, we need to start by liberating our minds with free education for those that want it. If a teacher is going to teach, then it doesn't matter who or how many. There is a culture of belief whereby if a man or a woman can't make it in their desired profession, then they are told that they can always teach it. And what sort of encouragement is that for both student and teacher? A subject requires to be taught with passion. The student requires engagement and the teacher deserves attentiveness. And if we insist on digitalising all our books, then free digitalised libraries should be advertised and available to everyone. I believe investing more in people is key. After all, they are what makes the world work. They are the innovators, that with better understanding may help to right injustices. A more thorough understanding of the environment needs to be taught to our children at a younger age. If we have a better grasp of how we interact with our natural environment, then perhaps we wouldn't be so industrious in our ambition to consume at the rate that we do, and might find that we interact with one another more graciously. After all, our planet is not mass-produced, and we weren't put together by machines. All products should be built with materials that can be completely recycled, making product redundancy less of a strain on the environment, hopefully rendering landfills and incinerators obsolete and creating more of a comprehensive recycling industry that will reduce the amount of mining that occurs globally while creating additional jobs. That which can be produced here should be produced here. It'll bring more jobs to those that need them and dramatically reduce the pollution caused by the shipping industry, and it will detach ourselves from unethically sourced import. Energy security in the UK is a must. There are sustainable sources of power. Solar, hydroelectric, wind power, geothermal, even nuclear energy is cleaner than we've got going on right now. If we no longer have to be concerned about where our energy comes from and whether or not it's clean, or where our food comes from and whether or not it's healthy or ethical, or whether or not all other consumables are safe and sustainably produced, the costs will reduce over time, and I'm convinced that our nation's general well-being will improve too. I want people to think about helping themselves in a positive way. I want more people to think about helping one another in a positive way, and that doesn't necessarily mean absolving one's guilt by throwing money at a problem. It means awareness and aid on a level that's accessible to everyone. It means standing for something. It means writing letters to your local MP, holding that sign in protest and discussing real issues. We have a wealth of knowledge at our disposal and one of the most comprehensive media networks in the world, but we choose to trivialise ourselves by manufacturing idols from celebrity-endorsed sideshows. Dear people, we do not need more celebrities. We need more philanthropists, doctors, scientists, philosophers and educators. A teacher once told me that I can't save the world, but I have a microphone and I have a voice. Now I have an audience. I hope my words will influence you to shatter your apathy and become more critical, even active towards embracing a more altruistic and balanced way of life that shuns greed and jealousy and embraces one another.